new show. Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Goodness. Another morning episode of Liberty Dad Podcast. I want to thank you for joining me. This, as usual, is a discussion on politics and culture. And if you're tuning in live, then I especially thank you for giving me your time so early. And I also want to thank people who might have looked and said, "Hey, it's past 7. Where is this guy?" Well, as it turns out, sometimes morning prep takes a little bit longer. And then the little guy, he wanted his Legos. I mean, come on. How are you going to deprive a little guy of his Legos? So I had to make sure to bring those Legos into the office so that he could play and have a little bit of fun. All right, today I'm going to be talking about the party of principle. What does it mean to be the party of principle? And should we ever support a non libertarian candidate? All right, there we are. I think I had a little bit of technical difficulty today. I'm not wearing my hat today, so that's okay. We're kind of getting things a little bit started rough here today. That's okay. I don't even know if people heard the intro, but I think the audio was playing, but I just didn't kind of have the video caught up yet. So a little bit of producer failure on my part, but that's okay. The show must go on. Here we are. We are going to talk about being the party of principle today, and I've titled this episode "The Party of Principle Over Party," because I hear a lot of times that people will say, well, you know what? I am principled and I care more about my principles than I care about the party. And so we're going to talk about that. Now, what was the genesis of this particular episode? Well, it's actually something that's been that I've had a lot of conversations with people over time, and so there really is no one thing that kind of said, you know what, I need to talk about that because this is this new thing. It's actually been a thing. So, but what kind of stirred me to say let's talk about it now was a Montana Libertarian Party tweet. So let me put this tweet up on the screen here. And so what we're going to do here, let's see where it is. Goodness, my show prep was not really great today, folks. So I apologize for that, but we will keep going here. All right. So here we are. Put it a little bigger there. I think we can make it a little bigger so that it can be read. How's that? Perfect. All right. So they're retweeting somebody. I don't know who Tony Rosales is. I assume he's a member of the Libertarian Party in Montana, but I'm not really sure. But he says the MTLP took a strong step forward to instill principles over party in our bylaws. Okay, so our bylaws. So he is, in fact, a member. He said, we are truly the party, the party of individual liberties. And then the Montana Libertarian Party, they tweeted out, our bylaws now permit the MTL, I keep wanting to say ML, the MTLP to endorse any candidate, regardless of party, if we believe it will advance libertarian principles, even when an L is filed in that race. Republican and Democrat candidates often publicly say they have a libertarian streak in Montana. This is usually a complete lie, but there are a few exceptions. We will always fight for principle over party. Libertarianism is a political philosophy. We might endorse you if you hold to it. Okay. So that's that's what kind of stirred me to talk about this, but I want to start off by pointing out that while it inspired the episode, I am not attacking the Montana Libertarians or the Montana Libertarian Party itself because I think that is very poor form. So this is not an attack on them. What this is just a much needed conversation in my opinion. Now, opponents of this kind of, this kind of direction will often just squawk, in my opinion. And they never really, like, a lot of times they'll just say, "Oh, we knew it, a bunch of Republicans pretending to be libertarians." That's not an argument, and it gets us nowhere. So I'm just simply gonna disregard any of that squawking, as I like to call it. And because of that squawking, proponents of this direction, they never really have to deal with the tough questions. So today, I'm going to do my best to not attack any libertarians because I don't think that's useful. And then also, I want to deal with some what I think are some tough, critical things that must be considered if we're going to sit here and talk about, well, should the Libertarian Party endorse candidates from other parties? Now, you might, if you're watching this out on social media, others have made calls about what the LNC should or should not do. Now, in my opinion, in a sense, this is kind of attacking our our fellow libertarians, which I don't think is useful. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna make any call about what the LNC should do. Now, the argument that's being made is that, hey, you cannot do this because it violates the LNC bylaws. So the way that it works for anybody who's watching who may not be familiar with the structure of the Libertarian Party, we have a national party, and then the national party has criteria for state parties. And once the state party meets that criteria, then they can be affiliated. And so the Libertarian Party says you are an officially recognized affiliate. And then, at least in Florida, and I assume it works the same in other states, the state party then has its requirements for the local parties, and the local parties fulfill those requirements, and then they become an officially recognized affiliate of the state affiliate, which is then effectively an officially recognized affiliate of the Libertarian Party. Okay, so that's how this process works. So a lot of people are like, "Well, hey, the LNC, the National Libertarian Party, in their bylaws does not permit this. So therefore, you are in violation of the national party, which means you are at risk of being disaffiliated." So I am not making those calls because, as far as I'm concerned, the LNC can take care of itself. And there's already a conversation in progress. So there's no reason for me to make those calls. And by the way, again, I think it's poor form because I refuse to dictate what other state affiliates will do. I don't want it done in my state. I don't want the Montana Libertarian Party saying, "Hey, you Florida guys, you should be doing this." I mean, it's nice to have the conversation, but I don't want them to try and wield any kind of authority over us. So I won't do it myself. And this is actually quite consistent for me. I rarely take such a position on what the LNC should do when it comes to affiliates. So, for instance, you might remember there was some trouble. I don't want to say trouble, but there was some drama over in New Mexico. I didn't make any pronouncement of what the LNC should do there. I didn't make any pronouncement of what they should do in Michigan, in Massachusetts. The one exception was in New Hampshire a while back, and that was over a concern of whether or not the LNC chair was involved in an issue. And oh boy, looks like, folks, you're going to be hearing the game Perfection. We just got that for my son yesterday. So if you hear the game Perfection playing in the background, I do apologize. But at any rate, so when there was a concern that the LNC may have involved itself in a state affair, then I kind of weighed my voice in and I said, all right, look, something, this needs to happen and so on and so forth. So I generally stay out of other state parties' affairs, and I may comment from time to time, but I try not to because effectively it ends up being just a bunch of libertarians fighting each other, and that wastes time. We have much bigger enemies to freedom than ourselves. But we do want to address a real issue here because there is a real issue. Um, if you're not familiar with the varying states, they all have different rules around how parties in their state are to function, or some of the functioning of their parties. For instance, one of the issues that even the Montana Libertarian Party had pointed out is that they have open primaries. So let's take a look at a quick map that I pulled up here, and I want to show you something so that you kind of get a sense. All right, so there's this map. It's a map with states with open primaries. Okay, and what you're seeing here is a whole bunch of different colors. And let's see, is that big enough on the screen? Let me see if I can make that just a wee bit bigger. Still keep it. Yeah, that'll work right there. All right. So we've got all these states and we've got all these different colors. And over to the right, we're only going to look at the top two because we're not going to, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this particular graphic, but it's a nice little graphic that lists all the states with open primaries. And at the very top here on the right hand side in the legend, we can see that it says primary election type. And then we've got in this like dark greenish color, it says open primaries. And there are 15 states with open primaries. So if I hover over it, it'll kind of make them flash a little bit so that you can see which states have open primaries. And as we can see over here, Montana has an open primary, and then it lists it as either a red or a blue state. And I believe what that means is that who's dominating in that particular uh, uh, who tends to dominate in that particular state, and it looks like the Republicans do. This may not work. I may be a little bit loud. So hey, buddy, can you play outside the door with that? That's really loud. Yeah, thank you, bud. All right, that wasn't going to work. I thought it might work, but nope, it's a little loud. Perfection's a fun little game, but it is definitely loud. Okay, so we can see that Montana here is an open primary state, and it's largely dominated by Republican. If you want to compare that now to Florida, Florida here is a closed primary state, and it is also happens to be a swing state. So that kind of gives you an idea, and you can find this this is on the website Wise Voter. The link will be in the show notes. And so you can go and look at all the different states and see what's going on. But what we can see here is that you have a smattering of different colors all over the place because you have all these different rules. You've got open primaries, you've got closed primaries, you got open to unaffiliated voters, partially closed, partially open, top two, top four, and then no primaries, which is going to be Louisiana, apparently. So what we have is the rules here in Florida, and we'll just kind of compare Florida with Montana. The rules here in Florida are different than the rules that are in Montana, which is another reason why it's not really a good idea for states to start dictating what goes on in another state. But that doesn't mean that we can't have this conversation. Like I said, so we're going to have this conversation honestly. The issue with open primaries, and let me tell you what an open primary is. If you don't know, I think most people know. Most of my listeners are probably very familiar, but just in case you're not, it basically allows voters of varying parties to vote in other party primaries. In other words, if I was in Montana and I'm a libertarian, I could vote in the primary for Republicans or Democrats. Now, I believe that the rules tend to state, and I don't think they're always so consistent, that if you vote and that you can only vote in one primary. So, what are some of the problems that are presented for libertarians in an open primary state? Well, number one, it allows us to crossover voting. As I said, the Republicans could vote in the Democrats' primary, libertarians in the Republican, whatever, so on and so forth. Well, that has two elements to it, two major elements. You've got a good faith voting and you got sabotage voting. The good faith voting might be if you've got Republicans voting in a Democrats primary, that they simply may be wanting to have a more conservative Democrat. So that's a more good faith effort in voting, right? Like they're just like, hey, of these Democrats, this one in particular is one is the one that's more closely aligned with me, and I would like to see um, candidates on the ballot, come the general election who are more like me. The negative element would be the sabotage, where maybe again, if we're using the Republicans voting in the Democrats primary, maybe what they're trying to do is vote and make sure that the nominee for a particular seat, or I'm sorry, a candidate for a particular seat is a weaker opponent than who they have. So imagine if the Republicans all flock over and they vote for the weakest Democratic candidate, then that helps ensure that they have a win because now they might feel really confident about who's running in the Republican race, but they're kind of nervous that they're a stronger opponent may upset their win, so they'll go and flock over and vote for the weaker Democratic candidate. Now, whether or not this plays out, I'm not entirely certain how or like how it generally plays out because I don't live in an open primary state. Now, for the Libertarian Party, well, we're already a small party. So to either good faith, whether it's a good faith voting or sabotage voting, it doesn't really take a whole lot of effort from the Democrat or Republican parties to influence, our primaries if we have one. So that's the nice version, right? One of the big issues that Montana Libertarian Party was expressing was that they had no control over who their candidate would be. So the best case scenario of that, and we'll discuss what that means exactly. But the best case is that they simply have a libertarian who maybe isn't that good, right? Like there's a libertarian, they're a solid libertarian, they believe in libertarian things, but maybe they're not really a good candidate. And so therefore they get on the ballot, and now the Libertarian Party has this candidate that they don't have any control over, if you will. And the person that they are relying on to win is maybe just they shouldn't be a candidate. Like we've seen it. There are candidates, and you're like, yeah, that's not really your role in the party. Well, the way that it works in some states, like Georgia, for example, they elect their state level candidates at their convention. So I attended their convention, what was it, 2 years ago? And they voted who they wanted to run for Senate and who they wanted to run for, like their state house seats and their governor candidate and their lieutenant governor. So they voted, the delegates voted. So and in order to vote, you had to be a registered libertarian and qualify to be a state level delegate in Georgia. So somebody like, let's say I had just recently moved to Georgia, but I had not met the qualifications to become a state level delegate. And, so even if I was a libertarian, I might not be able to vote on who gets to be the candidate for, like, say, the governor. Or if I was living in Georgia and I was a Republican or a Democrat, and I decided that, hey, John Smith should be the candidate for the Libertarian Party for governor, I would have no say because I'm not part of that party. So that's the best case. You just simply get somebody who's maybe not so good. The worst case, however, is if the Democrats or the Republicans send a candidate to run for the Libertarian Party. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, that might make the party look bad on purpose. And depending on who they send, it could be destructive to the entire ballot. So imagine a scenario like this. You have the Democrats or the Republicans, and they pick somebody that they want to run. Again, we're talking in an open primary state. They say, "All right, John Smith, you're going to be our secret weapon because we think that they might run this, you know, they're going to run a bunch of candidates at the local level, and we need to make them all look bad. So what you're going to do, Mr. Smith, is you're going to go and run for governor, and what you're going to do is you're going to totally make them look bad. You're going to say all the crazy things in the craziest ways so that voters have a sour taste in their mouth for libertarians, for the Libertarian Party. And so then when, since you're running for governor, then that means all the seats below governor, so like county seats and so on and so forth. All those seats now they have to contend with the fact that this clown, you are saying that you're a libertarian and you're saying these crazy things. So therefore it makes them look bad and it's going to disrupt their run. And we will have a better chance because maybe the libertarians aren't going to be so good at getting the governor position, but maybe there's a bunch of county seats for which they have an opportunity to take. So a way to disrupt that might be to send in somebody intentionally as a higher level candidate to make everybody look bad, and the party has to deal with that. So that's the worst case scenario, and that's a very serious thing. Now you might say, "DL, come on, what?" Hopefully nobody says this. Really, hopefully no listeners of mine, no viewers, no audience, nobody in the audience that's listening to me would ever say this. But you might say, "DL, would the Republicans or Democrats really do that?" Yes, yes, they would. Um, Now, do I have super evidence that they actually have done that? No, but I have evidence. There's plenty of evidence. You can go out and you can look it up where they have done things to remove our candidates from the ballot. In some cases, it's been a single person where they disputed and they said, "Hey, this person, we question their signatures or something silly, right?" And in other cases, it's been where, and I'm trying to remember the state, but I believe this happened just recently in the last few years, where they got everyone kicked off the ballot, literally everyone in the state. Okay. So, yes, politics is dirty and they have money. They can afford to do such a thing. Right? So it's more than just the best case scenario of maybe we get a libertarian candidate who isn't so great and really doesn't belong running in that particular position or even at all. And the worst case scenario, it also could be where there's absolute direct sabotage to make the entire party look bad, and it wouldn't really take a whole lot of money, to be honest with you. And in fact, here's funny. Duval here in Jacksonville, Duval's the county, Jacksonville's the city. Duval had a state level candidate run in 2018 for a Florida Senate seat. So it is actually even common in a closed primary state like Florida for someone to pop up and run, and the party not really know who this person is. Right now, in this particular case, I'm going to go with this was your best case scenario. You had somebody who was honest. They weren't trying to make us look bad. Because at the time, I don't believe that we had enough people running, nor was this particular seat one that was large enough to really affect other candidates with throughout the state. So I think this was actually an honest run from somebody. Um, but we had somebody run. Her name was Joanna Tavares, and out of nowhere in 2018, the party gets wind of this, and I think I was the treasurer at the time. The party got wind of this person, this Mrs. Tavares, running, and so we were like, "Well, who is it?" Nobody knew. So I managed to get a phone number. I reached out. I called her. I had a conversation with her, and after the conversation, I got off the phone, and I was just thinking to myself, and I was like, she sounds more like a conservative Republican to me." But she was running as a libertarian, and I said, "Well, let's bring her in and have her talk to the libertarians." So we invited her to come to one of our meetings, and we had one of our bigger meetings because a lot of people wanted to find out who this person was. She came in, and it was very clear, very quickly that she was probably not a libertarian, or if she was, she didn't really understand our positions very well. Two things that I remember her talking about. She at one point suggested that we needed to bring God back to school. Now, no offense to any religious folk out there, but libertarians tend to oppose public school in the first place. So if we had our way, there wouldn't be a public school to bring God back into because we're trying to, abolish public schools in the first place. Not that we're against education. That's another story. We love education. And then the second thing was, I think she wanted she said there should be some sort of limit on guns. And so I mean, if you're a libertarian, by hearing this, that she did not get a warm welcome. Now, people weren't hostile and mean to her, but they were rough. They were really rough. She did not get it. She did not receive a good welcome. And so that's a case where even in the best case scenario, there's somebody running under the libertarian banner, and there was nothing that we could do about it. Like here in Florida, she could run as long as you are a registered libertarian within a given time frame before the election. You are permitted to run here in Florida, and there's nothing the party can do about it. The only thing that the party could do is simply say we're not supporting this particular candidate. But that has its own host of issues, right? Because if we since the Libertarian Party does not have a slew of candidates running all over the place, we usually have very few people. So if we disavow one of the very few people that's even running, it really doesn't look good for the party overall. So it puts us in a bit of a hard spot. So the question then becomes: should libertarians vote for Republicans or Democrats? Well, in my opinion, that's an easy answer. When I say libertarians, I mean broadly speaking, just libertarians. The answer is very easy. Each person votes for whoever earns their vote, period. End of story. Now, I'm saying that knowing that I am the chair of a party, but I'm not talking about the party right now. I am talking about individual voters who happen to be registered libertarians, and they will vote and should vote for whoever earns their vote. When we recently had 3 candidates running for city council here in Jacksonville, and when they showed up and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about running for city council," one of the very first things that I told them, I said, "You will have to earn every single vote, including libertarians. I want you to know that right up front. You are not guaranteed their vote." They all understood and said, "You're right. I have to earn every single vote I get." So this is always understood within the Libertarian Party, is that you don't just get votes. Okay. We don't necessarily operate that way. It's not a vote blue no matter who. We don't have these. I mean, you might see it online. We'll say like vote gold, and maybe we'll come up with some clever slogan or something like that. It's really just to promote our candidate, but we don't actually have this belief that you necessarily must vote a libertarian, period, 100%, and you're not a real libertarian, or you should get kicked out of the party or any other crazy nonsense. None of that is applicable in our party. Now, the bigger question is, should affiliates, whether it be local or state, support Republican or Democrat candidates? Now, I'm breaking this question down into 2 parts. First and foremost is, what about when there's no libertarian in the race? And then the second obvious one is, what about when there is a libertarian in the race? So let's start with why we might want to support a non-libertarian candidate in the first place. People often bring up former Senator Ron Paul, very popular in the libertarian community. He has sat in office as a Republican, and he's ran for president as both a Republican and a libertarian. He is wildly popular because he is unabashedly willing to get out there and tell you the libertarian message. In fact, I've got a little clip that I think people will find interesting. So let's play this clip. All right. And here we are. This is Ron Paul. Now it's I'm going to try to make it a little bit bigger here. Oh, there we go. I can make it bigger. It is this weird square because this comes from 1988. This is on the Morton Downey Jr. show. So it was a talk show back in the day. I'm not terribly familiar with the Robert. No, is it Morton? Yeah, Morton Downey Jr. I think is his name. Morton Downey Jr. This is on a show. This is a 1 minute and 40-second clip. So let's go ahead and play it, and let's hear how Ron Paul um, spoke to people.
So under the Libertarian Society, no, we don't fight Vietnam Wars. We don't fight the Korean Wars. We fight wars to defend America, and we stand for America. We stand for freedom.
Okay, he's getting made fun of now. That's Robert.
Yes, we
Downey.
get high. We get high, boy. We get high on the ideas of freedom. We get high because freedom and liberty is worth defending.
This is back in the Just Say No drug campaign. Look at him. Look at him. Well, like, okay.
Yeah, let me answer that. Just say no. Assume the responsibility of yourself. Don't assume the government makes your decision. You say no. Don't say the government do it. You say no. You have the courage to do it.
I think I detect his voice changing. Maybe his cojones are getting small.
No, they're not. Totally not.
No Nose Against Drugs. It's a program geared primarily down to kindergarten. We do it through music, a cartoon character called Little No-No, the drug fighter. No one else in the United States is giving us a hand.
Is a tyrannical approach to solving a social medical problem, and we endorse the idea of voluntarism and self-responsibility, family, friends, and churches to solve problems, rather than saying some monolithic government is going to make you take care of yourself and be a better person. It's a preposterous notion. It never worked. It never will. The government can't make you a better person. It can't make you follow good habits. Why don't they put you on a diet? You're a little overweight, and I think you'd be in better health.
You're a little choked out. You want to make president. You're a little choked out.
I'm tired of people like you.
Have the government do
I'm
that.
tired of people like you using the Constitution
Here it is. Watch.
to do whatever you want to do. If we legalize drugs, we're giving up on the whole country.
Oh man, every time I see that clip, I'm just filled with joy. It is so hilarious. Like he literally takes on an entire crowd, a hostile crowd. And he does it like the guy's like, I think your cojones are getting small. And I'm like, what world are you living in? Like, no way his cojones were getting small. Like, they might have been getting bigger. I mean, he's actively punching back at audience members, right? And I don't think he's being mean spirited. I think, it's just a debate. And to be honest with you, back in the 80s and the 90s, I think it was a little bit more acceptable to, to kind of have these kind of arguments and debate and not necessarily say nice things to each other. I think we've kind of got a little bit wussified lately, in this generation. But anyway, we'll talk about that some other day. So Ron Paul is unabashedly taking on an entire crowd with the libertarian message. Okay, so and this is a great thing, and he inspired a lot of people. Now, I am a latecomer. I am not what some people call themselves a Ron Paul libertarian. I do not, because it was not Ron Paul that necessarily brought me into the Libertarian Party, or brought me into libertarianism in itself. So I came in a different path, and then I learned more about who Ron Paul was after the fact. So I have a lot of respect for him, but I am different from some of those other folk who consider themselves a Ron Paul libertarian. Now, this video I want to point out is from 1988. It's when he ran for president as a libertarian. So he was a libertarian at the time, and he appeared again on Morton Downey Jr.'s show as a libertarian. He did later run as a Republican, I believe it was 2012. um, so a lot of people will point out that they'll point out the Ron Paul, and they say, well, shouldn't we as a party support the Ron Pauls? And, one of the issues is that I already pointed out, he was actually a libertarian in some of these videos that we see floating around. Now, not all of them, right? There are some videos where he is a Republican and he's speaking and he's doing a phenomenal job of presenting the libertarian message. And as far as I know, Ron Paul has always had that same message. Okay. So it's not like he switched parties and then switched what he was saying. No, I think he's always said this from the very, very beginning, I believe in 1976, when he first became a Congress member. So his record, and this is part of my point, he's always had this record. However, people tend to look at what he's done, and point out videos of him after he had a record to match his words. So we're not talking about a guy who just said, you know what, I'm going to run for the Republican Party, and here's my libertarian message. And then, and people supported him at that time, and they were really inspired at that time. They were inspired after the fact, when he's already got a record to match his words. So I think this is one of the things that we have to consider when we're talking about, well, should a party support somebody like Ron Paul? Okay. Because oftentimes people support candidates who may have the right words, but they have no record. And the record is extremely important, because what that tells us is that once you get to Washington, once you get into office, how will you actually vote? Because we've seen candidate after candidate, not necessarily libertarians, but candidate after candidate, who will say one thing and then they will vote another way. So I'm not impressed yet when somebody has the right words until they have a record that their words, a record to match those words. Now, let's bring that to something a little bit more recent. You may recall, if you follow me on Twitter, you may recall the whole Blake Masters controversy with Mark Victor. So, just to give you a quick rundown on what happened. So, you had Blake Masters, who was a Republican. He was running for Senate in Arizona. Mark Victor, Libertarian candidate, was running. And then I believe it's Mark Kelly was the Democrat candidate. They were all three running. Mark Victor, in a debate, said something that kind of sent a ripple wave through the Libertarian Party. We all got upset. Then he came back out and he said, here's my explanation. And I said, oh, that's a really great explanation. So I went from upset, initially, to, okay, he's got a great explanation. But then after that, the Libertarian Party, or the members of the Liberty community, there was a long conversation, on social media about whether or not we should support Blake Masters or whether or not we should support Mark Victor. Now, in this particular case, we're talking about having a libertarian in the race. Okay, so we're not talking about, somebody who's we're not talking about supporting a candidate where there is no libertarian. We're talking about where there is a libertarian in the race. And the big debate was, hey, Blake Masters, in his early years, has a lot of influence from libertarian thinkers. And a lot of the positions that he has are positions that we believe are vitally important. But the catch was Mark Victor had those same positions, and in some cases, better positions. So the question was, there's this big debate: should we support him or should we not? So I looked at it and I said, well, what it appears is that, we cannot say that Blake Masters might be the next Ron Paul or might be the next Thomas Massey, another Republican that people tend to another Republican name that people toss out, because you are banking on a future record to match his now words. Okay. And I think this is very critical. We need people who have a record. Otherwise, we can be easily duped. Now, you might say, well, if they think this way, but again, politics, politicians, they say one thing, they get into office, they do another thing. And it happens time and time again. And there's been plenty of so called liberty leaning Republicans who have done the same. Here's another number. Here's a number. Let's go by the math. And I pointed this out. So Ron Paul started his Senate career, or his, I'm sorry, not Senate, his congressional career in 1997. And that was the 94th US Congress. We are now in the 118th Congress. So let's kind of play with some numbers here, and we're going to make it super easy. This is part of why I was a little late with the show this morning. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to find out how many unique individuals served in Congress between the 94th Congress and the 118th Congress. Now, unfortunately, I was not able to find a neat list that I could download and maybe throw in a spreadsheet and sort it out and remove all the duplicates so I could find out how many unique names. Now, there's plenty of lists out there of how many. So we'll just go with 535, 100 senators, 435 members of the House. Okay, so 535. So assume that from 1997 till now, there have only been 535 unique individuals serving in Congress. Now we know the number is much higher now, but let's assume for just a moment. Three names tend to ever come up pretty much. The same three names: Ron Paul and Thomas Massey. Those are the first two, those are the biggest ones. And then occasionally, depending on which libertarians you may be talking to, Rand Paul gets tossed in there as well as somebody who can be somewhat reliable for a libertarian vote. That would be 3 out of 535. The math on that means that a half of a percent of all Congress members, if we're only counting 535 members between 1997 and 2023, a half a percent of all Congress members are someone who might end up being worth a vote over another libertarian. Now we're just doing a hypothetical here. I'm not suggesting that we should. Okay. Now, when you actually go and you find out how many members of Congress, how many unique members of Congress there were between 1997 and 2023, the 94th Congress, the 118th Congress, the number goes from 535 to I don't know how many, probably a few thousand. Okay. So what does that tell us? That means that half a percent goes down even more. In other words, statistically, Congress members do not end up as a Ron Paul, a Thomas Massey, or even a Rand Paul. They simply don't. Now, you might have a few more here and there that had some good votes or had some good things, but they're not names that are normally brought up. When people make the argument to me and they say, hey, here's a good Republican that I think we should support. And if you're talking about a regular libertarian, I would say, well, that's up to them. And they very well may be worth supporting for that person, right? It's 3 out of at least 535, which means it's literally a half a percent, but it's actually much lower because we know there were way more than 535 individuals between, again, 1997 and 2023. Okay. So it's just statistically unlikely that someone's going to turn out to be another Rand Paul, another Thomas Massey. They might, but we don't know. And so for if we're only looking at the math, I think for that reason alone, state parties, state affiliates, local affiliates should not vote or I'm sorry, should not support people from other parties. But that's not the end of it. I think there's actually more reasons for parties to not support candidates from other parties. The purpose of a political party is to run candidates. That's its primary purpose. It's virtually in all the governing documents for the Libertarian Party. But more importantly, when you look at the what they're required to do, there's simply too much fiscal responsibility and legal limits to use it for much of anything else. Okay, I mean, think about it here in Duval. I'm the chair of Duval, a county affiliate. If we are late on a report, or we have these quarterly reports, finance reports that we have to submit to the supervisor of elections. If I'm late, it's a $500 a day fine. $500. Like, and I think there's like some sort of like stop like after this point, but like at a minimum, if we're late on a report, we could be fined $500. So does it really make sense with at a county level if it's $500, and I assume that at the state and national level it's even worse. It, just that alone suggests that we should really be in it to win it with libertarians, because we're simply binding ourselves too much to try to support candidates from other parties. Now, again, I answered the question earlier about whether individuals should be able to, should we be more accepting of individuals who want to support a Republican or a Democrat candidate? Absolutely, because each person has to decide for themselves where their vote's going to go. And so I tell libertarians, I'm like, I'm like, look, I would like you to support the libertarian candidate, but if you support a Republican or a Democrat, that's your vote to do with how you please. Another reason is I think it would be better to use PACs because they simply have more flexibility. In Florida here, we found out because we ran 3 candidates for city council. We found out that there were like some like 80 or I think like 88 or something. There was like some 80 plus PACs to support Republican candidates. Like that's a lot of PACs. Like why are the Republicans? Why are the Democrats? Why do they have so many PACs in the first place? Well, part of that is to help shuffle money around. It's basically a runaround for campaign finance laws. It allows PAC A, who might have a lot of money, but give it to PAC B so that PAC B can take their money and pull it together and then support a particular candidate with their max. Maybe PAC B doesn't have the max, but PAC A can give them some money or whatever. So it's basically a way to kind of shuffle money around. And if the Democrat candidates if the Democrat Party and the Republican parties are themselves using these PACs, then the question is, why aren't we? If we want to play in the leagues against the big two, which we do, and we are, then we should probably take some cues on what they are doing. And they don't tend to really support other candidates. Like you don't really see that. So the big dogs, if you will, aren't doing it, but the little dog who has less power says, maybe that's a good idea for us. No, I don't think so. And to go further with that, there is an imbalance of power, and we've all seen it. Republican and Democrat parties consistently make ballot access harder via laws, and they work to disqualify our candidates. I talked about it earlier in the show. They disqualify candidates on an individual basis, and they've done it where an entire state has lost their candidates. I wish I could remember what state that was and what year. And here's another thing. They never offer any concessions. Why? Because they don't have to, because they hold the power. So from my perspective, what we're doing when the parties themselves go to support a Republican or a Democrat candidate, what we're doing is we're conceding what little power that we even have. And make no mistake, we do have some power. We wield some power. It may be small, but we wield some. Why? Because why else would they make ballot access harder? Why else would they work to disqualify our candidate? They've literally taken our candidates to court. Why would they do that? They do that because clearly we're a threat. We want to remain a threat. We want to become a bigger threat. We cannot become a bigger threat, nor will we remain a threat if we concede a little bit here, a little bit there, and a little bit there. It doesn't work that way. That is not how we balance out the power. The fact of the matter is, we are the underdog, whether we like it or not. So what the underdog has to do, they have to fight harder, and sometimes they have to fight a little bit more clever. But I don't think that parties supporting other candidates is that clever. The LP simply hasn't really learned to use what limited power it has to affect the races. And I think that is something that we have to consider, because if if we haven't learned to use the power that we have within our own party to impact the races, then how can we say that we're going to use our power within another party to affect the race, to maybe win for a particular candidate? Right? It To me, there isn't an argument that's being made that says this is how it will work. The argument just tends to be, well, I'm being principled, and therefore I'm going to support the Liberty candidate. And but again, the Liberty candidate, most of the time, almost always, is a candidate that you don't really know what their record is, because they don't have one. So they're the Liberty sounding candidate. They're not really the Liberty candidate yet. They're not a Liberty candidate until you have a record that, when they get into office, they're going to stand by their guns. Um, and then, let me think about this. The rigor for our candidates needs to be, often the rigor for our candidates is more aligned with philosophy than their ability to be charismatic and capture the attention of voters. Right. Like, I think that this is one of the things that the Libertarian Party has suffered from when it comes to candidates, is that we will often support a candidate who has maybe a great philosophy. They understand the libertarian principles very well. They have read all the material, but the fact of the matter is they're not very charismatic and they don't capture the attention of the voters. But we disregard that as unimportant. But it is important. And if it wasn't important, then the Republican and the Democrat parties wouldn't be looking for people that can capture the attention of voters. And they don't always do such a good job. But we do see that they look for candidates that are going to capture voters. Because let me tell you something. Politicians can count two things very well. They can count money and votes. And when it comes to counting votes, you have to be charismatic. You have to be able to capture the attention of the voters. All right. So I'm going to take a break here real quick. I want to say some good mornings to folks. So a little shout out real quick. Keith says happy Tuesday, as does Hector. Good morning to both of you. Good morning to everybody else that may be watching. If you are watching and you've turned in, if you've turned in, I need more coffee. If you've tuned in so early, I really appreciate you tuning in. It's it's something that I enjoy, seeing that people are hearing what I'm saying and maybe giving me some feedback and saying, "Oh, you missed the point on that," or "Hey, great point," what have you. So thank everybody for tuning in. We'll throw up one more comment on here. I haven't read it, so I don't know. Hopefully it's not a big FU. It's probably not. Just kidding, guys. Working in the GOP does work because of several advantages. Excuse me. Number one, to get elected, you're dealing with a microcosm of a minority in a closed primary. Number two, voter registration gives you a floor of support. So I do understand that, but I think we have to consider the ramifications of what we're doing. So it may, as a candidate, if you are running, as a member of another party, you might actually win. I mean, Ron Paul did win when he ran as a Republican, even though at heart he was a libertarian. But again, what I'm talking about is whether or not the party should support a candidate from another party, particularly one who is untested. And I think the answer is no. But what is the answer? Well, here are my thoughts, because I got to start wrapping this up. It's time to go to work. My W-2 job calling me. I think we need to insist on better quality libertarian candidates. I mentioned that a moment ago. We don't really look for charismatic candidates that are well-spoken and can capture the attention of voters. We tend to look for who has the great philosophy, who understands it well. And I think it needs to be all of those things. And we need to raise the bar and say, look, if you want to run and you want our support in the party, one, you need to understand the libertarian principles, but two, and equally, you need to be charismatic, you need to be well-spoken, and you need to be somebody that gives us confidence that you're going to be able to capture the attention of voters, not libertarian voters, non-libertarian voters. So that would include things like how they speak, how they appear, are they sharp? Like, there are some people, you ask them a question and they're like, well, and they seem like they don't really understand, or they're thinking too much about it. We need somebody that's sharp. And then, yes, of course, again, we need somebody that understands the philosophy, and because once they understand the philosophy, then if they're well spoken, they can communicate that philosophy in the same way that somebody like Ron Paul did. Without without all of that, I think that we would just apply what we're doing in our own party to candidates in other parties. I'm not sure that we're actually going to get the success because we're simply doing what we are doing now, and we'd be doing it for some other candidate for some other party. And it may give them a little bit of a boost, but I don't think that we're going to find that we're going to get a lot of liberty out of that in the long run, simply because, again, we haven't fixed what's not working here. The other thing is, and this is a point of contention for many people, I say that no candidate is so good that we shouldn't run against them. But that may mean, because again, we're talking about like, what is the answer? That may mean that we insist on yet even better candidates. So a question I get asked all the time is, well, would you run against, would you support running a libertarian against Thomas Massey? My answer is absolutely. However, I will say this, if you want to run for a city council race, I think the bar for entry, and I mean entry is for support. The bar for support is going to be lower than the bar for support for governor, than say the bar for support for president. And then there's yet even different bar of support if you're running against somebody who has a known history of supporting liberty in the way that we believe should be supported. So if you're running against, let's say, I'm drawing a blank here. Let's say that you're running against Thomas Massey, who is in the House. And then let's just use another Congress member here in Florida. Let's say you were running against Marco Rubio. I'm trying to think of names that are going to be notable to more people. To me, you need to be a much better libertarian candidate to run against somebody like Thomas Massey than you would to run against Marco Rubio. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't still need to be good. Clearly, Marco Rubio was, quote, good in the sense that he was able to get elected and he had a lot of support. I'm not talking about his policy positions. Those are awful. What I'm talking about is he's not a no-name person. Neither is Thomas Massey. Both of them have name recognition. So if you're going to run against them, there's different levels of who you need to be in order to run against them. And I think that the bar is higher to run against a Thomas Massey than it would be to run against a Marco Rubio, than it would be to run at a city council level. There's simply different levels. And we need to, as a party, to start recognizing that. And we need to start saying, look, candidates, if you want our support, you need to level up. And if you don't level up, we're simply going to give you the cold shoulder. Because I think that we should support our own candidates to the fullest. But in order to give them, it's kind of like if you ever watched the movie, Starship Troopers, there's a scene, there's a scene there where he is like the Ratchek, I think it was his name, but he was formerly the school teacher, but then he was like he led like a squad or something like that. And so he said, I demand the best, I give the best, right? They're getting ready to party and celebrate, having beaten back some bugs on a planet out in space. And he's like, I demand the best, I give the best. And I think we need to be the same way. We need to demand the best, but we also need to be ready to give the best. And if you're not willing to be the best, then how can you ask for us to give you? How can you ask for us to support you in the fullest? And so this needs to be a very mutual back and forth. We demand the best, you give the best. You give the best. Yeah, we demand that. You get it. So again, whatever we've done in-house, I think is what we'll do out of the house. So I think we're going to get the same results effectively, but with different people. And I think that we cannot rely on people that are untested, and we cannot bank on the parties not finding some way to subvert us, as if we were to start supporting non-libertarian candidates. Again, that's on the basis of the party supporting them. So again, just to kind of wrap up really quickly, I want to point out, if you are a standard libertarian, you don't hold any office with the Libertarian Party, you're just a regular libertarian, your vote goes to whoever has earned it. Doesn't matter whether it's a libertarian, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. If that person has earned your vote, then they get your vote. End of story. Now, I would prefer that libertarians vote for libertarian candidates, because I believe that libertarian candidates almost always are better than their Republican or Democrat counterparts. But again, your vote, you decide what you do with it. But as for the party, I think for the reasons that I've outlined in this show, it is absolutely not a good idea for the party itself, whether it's a local, state, or even the national party, to support candidates from other parties. Because at the end of the day, while the bylaws may prohibit it, bylaws can be changed so long as they're not violating any campaign, in any any election laws that we have to abide by. So that's my show for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. There's a lot of comments in there from Hector. Um, so check them out, see if you agree with him or not. I haven't had a chance to read all of them necessarily. But I do want to thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope this clears up a lot of things. Again, libertarians, please do not attack other affiliates, other libertarians. Do your best to have an informed debate and conversation about these topics. They are important. They do need to happen. But we got to remember to stop attacking each other. That does us no good. Be sure to catch me every Monday morning. I keep saying that every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. And I will do my best to be more on time. I apologize again for being late this morning. You can join me for an informed discussion on politics and culture, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then join me on Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co-host, Susan Hogarth, to discuss LP happenings. We go out and we find what's happening in the Libertarian Party across the United States. We find local and state and local affiliates, and we see what kind of events they're doing, and we just simply report on them, maybe have a little bit of conversation about those particular events, and occasionally bring on guests to talk about those events more in depth. Be sure to do all the proper audience actions, like subscribe to my YouTube channel over at youtube.libertydad.com. Ring the bell, like some videos, drop a word or two in the comment section. Yes, I promise I am still getting to Rumble. I'm working on it. It's taken a little bit longer than I expected, simply because I'm short on time. If you want to follow me on social media, I suggest just diving right over Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter, on X, formerly known as Twitter. And you can also find me Liberty Dad on Facebook, or send me an email, libertydadpodcast@gmail.com, because I would love to hear from you. Remember, folks, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time, and I'm out.